But normally, so as I start this stuff, and I always start at the beginning because I guess for a lot of people, I'm based in England, but we've got an international audience. So it's always good to say where you were born and raised so we can just sort of track your journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so go back to the beginning. I was born and raised in a small town called Peoria, Illinois, like 2 hours south of Chicago. And, I grew up in church and started playing instruments at a very early age, 8 years old. That's when I started playing for church, started playing the organ for church. And so that's where my music career started.
Did you sing or just the playing?
Well, I primarily was playing, but the thing that was happening, like I didn't realize it at the time, but I was getting a master class in singing and arrangements, vocal arrangements, because working with choirs, you learn improvisation, you learn how to deal with different attitudes, you learn so much. You learn so much at one time, so much information, and I realized these things later on in life. But yeah, by the time I was 10 years old, that's when I first started like making my own money, like I was on payroll at my check at the age of 10.
Okay.
And so it's so funny. I've always encouraged my son and my daughter to do things that you love.
Yeah.
And like in terms of career. And so it's kind of hard because both their mothers have, educational backgrounds, and they're like have master's degrees and this, and here I am telling them, hey, just focus on what you love. Because I never had a conventional job. I started at 10 years old making money through music, and I haven't looked back since. And so that's what has supported my life. And so I kind of feel like I've never worked a day in my life. I don't say that arrogantly. I say that very humbly, actually. And yeah, that's how my career started, right there today. Go back to the very
but just before we move on from that, what you said is really powerful, and because I'm a therapist, but I work with children under 21 to 5, and sometimes when they struggle, I kind of use that, and I just what are you passionate about, and if you find out what you're passionate about, I studied business. But I love talking, so I changed in my career, 7 years ago, and became a therapist. And it's not like work. I'm sitting down listening to people tell us their stories, and I'm getting paid for that, and then helping them navigate that. So hopefully that's stuff that I think young people who are watching can understand. Find something you love doing, and you don't work, and actually you become so good at it, people will seek you out. At 10 years old, did you think you'd go into it as a career, or was it just okay, I'm gonna do?
No, because not necessarily. It's crazy because then I was more of a musician. I wasn't thinking about producing yet. I was just mainly just playing in church, playing with a lot of bands, playing a lot of weddings on the weekends. And so but that was it. But those things were teaching me so much and preparing me actually for, later on when I actually got into producing. And so at the same time, the thing that was interesting that was going on, the town that I'm from, where I grew up, there was no urban radio.
Oh.
You had to search for those. So you had to go to the record store and get them. But there was no urban radio. So I grew up, it's interesting, in one instance, I grew up, was raised in a Baptist church. A lot of my friends were in Pentecostal churches and like African Episcopal churches. So I got a lot of the church. I got like the whole spectrum of the Black church experience. And so one instance I had that, but in another instance, every day my mother did something that was the best thing she could have done for me. She just turned on the radio.
Okay.
Because I'm hearing things like the Carpenters, Chicago, Janis Ian, the Beatles. These are the things I'm hearing every day.
Wow.
So I'm learning all this pop music, and like I'm being taught so many different things because I was always with my mother and she always had the radio on. So it was like I'm getting a master class in writing from a pop perspective, from groups like the Eagles, the Police, where their music will continue to outlive them by generations. And so, but I'm getting all this information, and I'm on a subconscious level, I'm downloading all this information and didn't even realize it. Things that 20 years later, as a creator, I will reach back and like be inspired from those things.
Yeah.
And so, so I had all these things happening as a kid. And mind you, I'm not realizing this till later on in life, far into my adult years. Like, wow, with the way I grew up, man, I wouldn't change a thing. Like, I learned so much about music before I even graduated from high school. I learned so much I didn't even realize, So anyway, that's how my music career started, and very, very humble beginnings. I wasn't around a lot of in my home. I was the only musician, so I wasn't around a lot of in terms of in my home. So which really makes me realize how much I was very passionate about it, because it wasn't like my parents were musicians or anything like that.
Yeah,
because they weren't. But yeah, I wouldn't change a thing about the way I was. The way I came up and the way my path went. It was
in those early days. In those early days, you weren't listening to the Motown as much as you were open to talk. Wow.
Interestingly enough, I got more into, like, I heard things on the radio. Like, for example, I heard songs like from the Isley Brothers when they came out with Between the Sheets, for example. Like, I would hear Between the Sheets and like, but I never heard their hidden songs like Sensuality, like these kind of songs that you have to, like the B-sides, actually came when I met Tim, because he grew up in a household where his dad was a musician and his dad was in like a tribute band for Earth, Wind and Fire.
Okay.
And so he had a completely different path early on than I did. And so that's why when we were working together, it really gelled really well in from a creative aspect. And so, but yeah, where I grew up, man, and it was no urban radio. So I had to, again, I knew songs, but I had to go search for them. We did have one thing that we could do. If you took your cable from your television and hooked it up to your stereo system, we could access stations from Chicago. Now, Chicago had like 4 or 5 urban radio stations. So every now and then on the weekends, because I come from a very religious home. So when my dad was away from home, hey, let's put the cable onto the thing. Let's see what's going on the radio on BMX or, GCI, these radio stations in Chicago. So that's why I said you would hear certain songs. But when I met Tim, I learned a lot from him about actually going and like looking at the B-sides and like looking at the hidden songs or albums that people don't talk about, because those are a lot of times where a lot of the gems are. So I learned that early on from Tim. And so so that's when I started exploring a lot of R&B that I was unfamiliar with. And so which made my journey so much more like exciting. And for Tim, it was the same thing, because Tim had never heard of all these amazing gospel artists that I grew up listening to, like guys like Commission, Fred Hammond, these guys. Like, I've been listening to those guys since I was 10 years old. But Tim had never heard of those guys. Tim had never really heard of, people knew the Winans, but people didn't like know all the songs throughout every album that the Winans put out, which was so much music. So anyway, he was learning these things, and I was telling him, "Oh, you never heard this? Or you never." So that was a cool thing about when we first started working together, the exchange of information, and we both were just like, growing and growing and growing, and so that was a really cool thing. So, but yeah, that's how it all started.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of Halftime Chat. Please remember to subscribe, share, and comment. But most importantly, why don't you become a member of Halftime Chat? We've got amazing videos, amazing perks, and being able to support the channel. But anyway, thanks for watching. Take care.
I never participated in that category.
And somewhere in between us, or even loving us, on which I didn't miss you with.
What was it like growing up?
She's still making an impact on Full House. works for you, but just for me,
No. Okay, you okay?
They don't understand what Jonas boys and men all
Play it.
These guys, they all work together.
I mean, I love all different genres.